Thank you, Radka. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming today, and thank you to the festival for having me to do this. It's a great honor to be here, to be with our guest today. As Radka said, our guest today is Barry Levinson, whose contribution to cinema and also to television and to writing over the last 50 years of his career in show business is remarkable. And the more you research it, the more remarkable it becomes. As well as winning the Academy Award for Rain Man for Best Director, he's actually won 4 Emmy Awards. He's been nominated 6 times for the Directors Guild Award, including 3 times for TV work. He won the Writers Guild Award Lifetime Achievement Award in 2010. He won the Golden Bear in the Berlinale in 1988 for Rain Man. And this year he is the recipient of the Karlovarském Crystal Globe for Lifetime Achievement. I'm really looking forward to speaking to him, to talk about his films, his TV work, his influences, his collaborators, his incredible flair and knack with actors, from the youngest to the oldest. It's a huge career. We've got about an hour and a half to cover 28 films altogether. We may not get through all of them. 23 films for the cinema, 2 documentaries, and 23 films for the cinema, 3 for the TV, and 2 documentaries. So many I can't even keep count of them all. So, to give you a little refresher in the career of Barry Levinson, we've prepared a little clip that we're going to show you now. So please roll the clip. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Barry Levinson. I think you have some fans in Karlovy today.
Very nice.
As I said in the introduction, you've made some of the most beloved and successful and acclaimed and films that will live on through the whole of cinematic history, I think. And as long as people are watching films, people will be watching films like Rain Man and Dinah. So we're absolutely thrilled to have you here to receive this year's Crystal Globe, following in the footsteps of other great names from cinema.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. We're having a terrific time as well. Just wandering around and seeing what's going on.
We'll go through some of the amazing films that you've done in your career. I want to start with Rain Man, which we're showing tomorrow here. It's one of 3 films that we're showing in tribute to you, as well as Wag the Dog and your very latest film, Paterno, which showed this morning in the big room. I hear it was a big hit with the audience. They dug it?
We peeked in towards the end to see if people were still there, and it was a quite a good reaction to it. So I was curious, to be honest with you, because I thought Paterno, and not many people here may know about Paterno, American football, and the scandal that took place. So I was saying to my wife, so there's like 1,100 people, seats, 1,100 seats. They're going to get anybody to go there? I was thinking maybe 150 people might show up or something, but it was full, and it was very exciting. And it actually looked good on a large screen, which was great.
We congratulate you on the success of Paterno, and I think it's, as I said, it's a unique career. Television and film, and your early days as a stand-up comedian and writing and acting, and then television, film, and now television again. I just want to read one quote from Guillermo del Toro when he won the Oscar this year for The Shape of Water for Best Picture. He was asked backstage why the film was set in Baltimore, and Guillermo del Toro said, "When I was a kid, I fell in love with one of the primal trilogies in cinema for me, Barry Levinson's Baltimore trilogy." He said, "The 3 films, Avalon, Dinah, and Tin Men, are fabulous landmarks of American cinema." And that was what he said just after getting his Oscar.
Yeah, I know. When I heard about that, I was absolutely thrilled. It's one of the things about film that's so interesting, that here's a person growing up in some small town in Latin America, and somehow he can relate to these stories of people in Baltimore and that culture that's taking place. And that's really one of the exciting things, that across the world, you can sometimes do a piece of work that connects well beyond your expectations. And it's one of the mysteries, in a way, because you never know what's going to appeal to what group of people. And when it happens, it's really remarkable. That's what makes this art form so interesting.
Were you able to meet Guillermo del Toro? Because he filmed.
No, I
filmed
didn't.
in Baltimore.
Well, I don't know if he actually went there, but he was influenced by it. But I don't think he shot it there. I'm not sure where he did it.
And it's interesting that what his version of the trilogy is it's Tin Men, Avalon, and Dinah. Whereas the real trilogy is, we would probably say it's Liberty Heights in there and maybe take out Tin Men. So it's really a quadrilogy, but
Yes.
the Barry Levinson quadrilogy is really a bit of a mouthful. So
Yeah, it's too big a word, isn't it?
we'll just say we'll just say the Baltimore movies. We'll get onto those next, but I do want to talk about Rain Man because it's the 30th anniversary of the film. I think a lot of people are looking back at it now and revisiting it. And I actually, before I came here, I texted a few of my friends and I just said, "What are your top 3 Barry Levinson films?" And they nearly all said number 1, Rain Man. So, and these were younger people that there wasn't just the old codgers like me and my friends. So it's a film that is enduring and it is part of the culture. It's part of the cinematic culture. It's changed the language. It's changed the language of cinema. Watching the clip there, it just brings it all back. Now, the story of how Rain Man came to be, we could spend the next 2 hours just talking about the history of Rain Man. It was a difficult project. I believe you were the 4th director to come in. I think
Yes.
we had Martin Brest, Steven Spielberg, and Sidney Pollack
Right.
were doing it. At one point, it was going to be Bill Murray playing Raymond, and Dustin Hoffman playing the Tom Cruise part. I think I'm right in saying.
I think that was before me, but
Yeah.
yes.
So when you came into the project, were you aware that it was seen as this sort of tricky thing that nobody could quite get a handle on it?
Yes. In this regard, what happened, and I'll just give you the short version, it's kind of one of the things how the business works that you don't normally write about. But what happened is Sidney Pollack was going to direct it. We both had the same agent. I had spent a little time with Sidney over the years, and when he was doing Tootsie, he asked me if I'd come in towards the end of the process when they were in rehearsals about maybe doing some additional writing, and I really didn't do much, but we remained, friends over a period of time. So my agent said that Sidney is going to do this movie called Rain Man, and he's having problems with the script. And can I read it and give him some thoughts about the screenplay? And so I read it, and on the way to, as it turns out, we were going to Palm Springs, California, and I was in the car, my wife and another couple, and I'm telling the story. And if you ever see Rain Man, you'll see those big wind turbines along the desert. And I said, and the Tom Cruise character is driving by. We like wind turbines, etc. And I'm telling the story, and Diana, my wife, said, "Well, you should direct that film." I said, "No, I'm just giving ideas to Sidney." And I'm talking more, and he says, "Well, you definitely should do this movie." And I said, No, I'm good, Sidney. And when I get to the hotel in Palm Springs, I call Sidney, I pass along the ideas. Diana keeps saying, "Why are you telling him the ideas? You should direct the movie." And so I tell him all these thoughts, and days later, Sidney basically tells the agent he just can't see his way through. And I had told Sidney that I think the key is to throw out a lot of the story elements. It's too much story, too much plot, stay with the 2 guys in the car. And anyway, he couldn't do that, and so I got asked if I would come in and direct it, and which I did. And we were starting to do the rewrite, and we had gotten as far as the rewrite in terms of Qantas, that thing. And the reason that came up, I had said to the writer, you can't just drive across country in a Buick. When you have to be in LA very quickly, you'll get on a plane and fly. And he said, "Well, what am I going to do? Otherwise, if we fly, we lose the road movie." I said, "Well, you have to have a reason to drive across country." And he said, "Well, what are we going to do?" I said, "Well, Raymond won't get on a plane that's ever crashed. Any airline that's crashed, he won't get on a plane." He said, "I know, so what are we going to do?" I said, "Well, Qantas never crashed. That airline has never had a crash, so that's the only airline he'll get on. And of course, there is no Qantas in Cincinnati, so they're going to have to drive across country." And that was the and then we're going to go from that point on. And then a lot of the script that hadn't been completed, we were basically improvising it along the road as we went along. And that's sort of how sometimes things happen in a film. You know where you're going, so it's not like you have no idea. But in the journey, you can add little things. And what I was saying to Sydney is you need to find those little moments between them, which I think will tell a lot about the character and the autistic problem that exists with Raymond. And Dustin, early on, and I only tell this is because it's a combination of acting and how to solve an acting problem. Dustin said to me, it says when he gets nervous that he goes into a pitching motion, and it takes too long to do the pitching motion. And I said, well, let me see. And he started doing it, and I said, no, I can see that. So it was an acting problem for Dustin. He didn't know how to handle a moment when he's agitated. So I said, let me think about it. And then I said to him, listen, when you get agitated, why don't you do Who's On First? He said, what do you mean, the Abbott and Costello routine? I said, yes, and Raymond won't know that it's humorous because autistics don't understand humor in that way, and he'll do it as a mantra. So I started saying, who's the first baseman, the first baseman? So I'm saying the first baseman, who's on first? Who's on first? That's what I want to know, who's on first? And that whole thing, and he said, I do all that. I do that. I said, yeah, you do it as a mantra. And then we checked with a psychologist, a psychiatrist who deals with autism, and said, no, that would make sense. And so that little thing, when he gets nervous, agitated, got into the film. And because you're shooting in continuity going across country, periodically we would drop it in at various places along the way that would show the problems that he's having, and that begins to inform the audience about certain things. And then for how does Charlie, which is Tom Cruise, how does he deal with this person? And then you create those conflicts, and which we did as we went across country.
I'm sure there are many people in the audience who would, from the industry, and they know that shooting in continuity is not the norm. Most films are not shot in continuity. And Dinah, I think you deliberately shot out of continuity, but we'll get on for reasons about that. You've described Rain Man as being kind of an extremely independent film because the studio left you alone, because you were out on the road with one of the, two of the biggest film stars in the world, driving across sort of with an idea where you might go. And you talk about, the studio just didn't interfere, they kept away from it. Is that an accurate way of putting it, that they were just happy for you to go off with Tom and Dustin and see what you come back with?
I don't know how happy they were. They first of all, those aren't places they like to visit, The only place that they came to was Las Vegas. Oh yeah, well, we'll go there. And without giving names away, the two producers ran up to me. They had never seen anything, and they hadn't gone to any place, but they showed up in Las Vegas. And one of them came up and said, quick, which one has the mental problem? That's how much attention they paid to the film. And then of course, when I finished the film, no one was particularly happy because as if I made it up along the way, that one is autistic. Because they went, what are we going to do? He's autistic. No one knows what autism is. We got a problem. It's, this. And it's like I threw it into the story, you know what I mean? And so we had a rocky start. And so we didn't open to really great business. But what happened is, and that doesn't really exist now, the movie kept going up week after week after week. It just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it opened internationally. And then there was that moment in time, which will never happen in my lifetime, and we were #1 in every country of the world where we were playing, which was one of those strange things that happens periodically.
Even more strange, the film that kept you from #1 in the first week in the US, remember what it was? In the US, when you opened at #2.
No.
The #1 film was a film about two brothers who don't realize they're brothers, and they meet each other and they go on a road trip. It's called Twins, with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. So no scriptwriter could have written that number 1 was Twins and number 2 was Rain Man. And then you even mentioned Schwarzenegger later in Wag the Dog. The film stayed in the top 10 from December the 16th, 1988 to, I have to look this up, I'm not like Raymond, I don't know it all.
I'm amazed.
From December the 16th, 1988 to May the 26th, 1989. And that's one of the longest runs that any film's ever stayed in the American top 10. So, so the gamble paid off in a gigantic way. There was a wonderful detail that I believe your wife was pregnant when you started to make the film.
Yes.
And there was this idea that you should have a nice quiet birth in some nice city somewhere. But you had a discussion about that? What was the story about that?
No, what happened was, because Diana kept saying you ought to do it, and then I said, well, now what am I going to do? I'm going to direct the movie, and we're going to be on the road. And you're pregnant, and you said, well, we'll have the baby, wherever you're filming. And it turned out to be Cincinnati. So.
And that was Sam who was in.
That was Jack.
Jack. Right.
Sam was born during another movie, but that was in London.
That's always
and Jack has always been upset because Sam was born in London and he got to be born in Cincinnati.
Well, you see, this is the brothers always find ways to have. To have frictions. We do have a clip lined up from Rain Man because we've been talking about it so much. I'm sure everybody in the room's seen it more times than they can think of. It is the Qantas clip.
Oh, really?
It's such a lovely clip. I think it's about 3 or 4 minutes. So since we're showing the DCP tomorrow, I said if we can put it on just to give people a little flavour of Rain Man. So if they haven't got the ticket for tomorrow, start queuing now is the mantra. We've got to get it back into the box office top 10. So if we could have the little clip from Rain Man by Barry Levinson, please. But how do you direct a scene like that? I mean, what is the process there? Because I wouldn't even know where to start when you have actors like that and that situation. I know you've said in the past that you create an environment where the actors can do what they do, but for instance, that scene there, was it a hands-on experience for you? How did you do it? What's the secret?
Well, I don't try to. Well, there are two things to it. One, you have to begin with the scene and the requirements of it, because you're taking something that seems on face value is that he's afraid of planes, except Qantas, because that's never crashed, right? And you take that seemingly absurd moment, and now that's his ritual. That's what he understands. Those are among his many fears, right? And the other person, Charlie, has to get to Los Angeles. And it's the beginning of really that he's going to face all of these things along the way. And so you'd say, all right, that's a huge plot thing, because it's now going to take him away from get to LA, deal with my money issues, etc. It's now going to be prolonged, and he's going to have to deal with them for 3 days. And what's going to happen in 3 days to a person autistic that has all of these rituals? And so that sets the table for what's going to happen in terms of if you were as a writer, how does that work? Taking something that seems so crazy as opposed to, we're going to fly, I don't want to fly, I don't want to fly, I don't want to fly, and we're going to drive. You know, this has got more coloration to it. So, and it also tells you, in the course of it, you begin to understand how his mind works and all of those fears that he has, and an individual who doesn't understand any of it and doesn't want to deal with any of it. And he's going to have to deal with it. Because for 3 days, he's going to be in a car or in motels dealing with someone who is autistic, who has no understanding whatsoever. And that's going to what's going to happen. And so that becomes a key component. So now how does it play out? It plays out initially, and it's all, he sees there's wheels. Now he sees there's an airplane. Otherwise it was an abstract. He's in a building, he is not paying attention. He was watching a monitor. He doesn't pay attention to environment, anything. And now, it's a plane, and then you begin to build that sequence. Now, for me, rather than sitting around and having a discussion, and rather than rehearse, and you stand here, and then you come around behind, and then, Dustin, you move around him, and then you're going to do a semicircle, and the camera, and because once you do that, then you're on your way to this mechanical process. So I will sort of say, well, it'd be good as if you're meandering around and we're not just standing there and you're walking towards the monitor and not saying, on this line, go here, on that line, do this, etc. Is to allow for that, what I call control freedom, they kind of know where they can be, and then let's see what the instinct and how it functions in the scene. So that he's coming around behind him and whatever. No, Ray, we can do it. And let that evolve, and then I can refine it and say, well, maybe here you can do a little thing. Because my feeling is you give too much information to an actor in the beginning, everything gets mechanical. Then it's like, now when I'm crossing over, do I pick up the bottle at that point when I say the line and then turn? Then for me, we're on our way to a nightmare. And I wanted to find the spontaneity, because your brain will take over. Once you start to believe the credibility of the scene, certain things, which you might call physical action, begins to find its own place. When you might take a sip of water, when you might do this, when you might stand up, when you'll sit down. And let's see how that's going to work in the context of the scene, rather than talk. And so I think if an actor is prepared, then you allow instinct to function as well. And then you get some unpredictable moments, and then sometimes extra improvisational moments that come up because they're just in it. That's a shorthand, I guess, of trying to explain how acting works in terms of directing and camera and all that.
I think that also ties in with how you got into the business, which we'll get into next. But before we move on from Rain Man, I've got one last thing to say. Also, I've been asked to ask the photographers no more photography after this, because it's getting a little bit distracting, so if you wouldn't mind, thanks. Tom Cruise. Dustin Hoffman won the Oscar. He won every award going. And as far as I know, Tom Cruise didn't get nominated for anything. He's 25 years old when he made this film, and I think it's definitely Tom Cruise's best performance. And I think it's one of the best performances in a Barry Levinson film. But he now gets the credit. Whenever you say to people, Rain Man, they go, Tom Cruise in that film, wow, he's as good as Dustin Hoffman.
Right.
Is that just one of those movie business things, and Tom has had a wonderful career and all that? Or should he have been given a different
because
option?
One is a showier role. And initially, the showier role will get more attention. And then time starts to give recognition to whoever the other person is, or time gives recognition to a film in general that's completely overlooked because of whatever things that it's dismissed, and all of a sudden finds another life later on. It's part of the business, because you'll see some incredible performances that are just no one paid attention to critically, and then all of a sudden, time has a way of, I guess, finding those special films, performances, and just part of the game.
And so if we want to now move on to the quadrilogy, starting with Dinah. But to talk about Dinah, we have to go back to, let's say, 1967, when I think 67 was when you left Baltimore to go to Los Angeles. 67,
yes, yeah.
68, 67. Yeah. So you've got this life in Baltimore, and for a kid from Baltimore, the idea of going to Los Angeles and becoming a filmmaker, growing up, this was not top of your wish list, as I understand it.
No, it wouldn't be on any wish list, because I didn't understand how you would even be in the business, and I never really understood. I have to tell you this. I didn't even know that there were directors when I was a kid. You went to a movie, you saw a movie, and that was the end of it. Oh, that was nice. You didn't think about it. And then the first time it ever occurred to me that something here that I don't understand is when I saw On the Waterfront. And I was a kid, and there's a moment in the film where Marlon Brando's with Eva Marie Saint, they're walking, and she drops her white glove, and Marlon Brando picks it up, and he's talking to her, and here's this former boxer, and he's trying to put this little white glove on his hand, and he's talking to her. And I remember as this kid, and going, how did that happen? That's like a great moment. I remember as a kid, it was like suddenly, like, wow, how did that happen? And then after the movie, we went out, and I wanted to see the one sheet, And I'm looking, and then it says director, and it says Elia Kazan, and I went, oh, he must have had something to do with this. And then I started to see other movies that Elia Kazan did, and then I was like quite fascinated by this director because his movies have all of these little moments and a lot of behavioral things going on rather than sort of action or whatever. And that was the beginning of paying any attention, but I never would have thought to go do any of this because it didn't occur to me. It wasn't, back then there weren't even film schools that anybody talked about. And so, to be honest with you, I've actually been writing about this thing. When I was younger, I was ill for a number of years, and I was in hospitals quite frequently. And back then, I tried to explain to people, say, you know, they didn't have televisions in the room. They went, no televisions in the hospital room? You know, no. And my father, because he had an appliance store, he brought a television into the hospital room because it was going to be there for a while and had this television. And when I would keep going back to the hospital, I'd keep bringing a television in. And I started watching all these television things and these movies that be on in the afternoon and these late shows and all of that stuff. And I started to get to watch all of these things. And that became part of my education, was suddenly seeing these things. And then by chance, when I was working when I was going to school at American University, I was working in the local television station that I got a job there. And I used to, and this is before computers, they used to have, you know, the Late Show, which I had been seeing, and the Late Show, and I used to have to roll commercial breaks into it. So I saw 2 movies a night, 6 days a week, for a year. And I just kept seeing these movies. And you have to understand this. Because there wasn't a film culture in a sense. So when I saw Citizen Kane, and I came up to the diner, I said, you ever see this movie, Citizen Kane? They went, what? I said, well, it's this, and I'm trying to explain the movie. So I saw like Citizen Kane, and I saw Grapes of Wrath, and I saw The Best Years of Our Lives. And I kept seeing all these movies that I had never heard of because they didn't play in the movie theaters when we were kids, and those films are gone unless you saw them on television. And that's where I saw all of those classics. Even if you say Casablanca, saw it on television. You know, Maltese Falcon, saw it on television. I saw all of this on television because they didn't play in the movie theater. It was all before, you know, my time. And that was sort of like a little bit of my education, but not to do anything with it other than the appreciation of movies.
But at 25, you moved to Los Angeles, which even then was the capital of cinema.
It was.
I mean, do you think subconsciously part of you wanted to be near to where all of these films had been made? Or
No. I'm going to tell you a quick story, and I'm going to abbreviate as much as possible. I was hanging around at the beach in Los Angeles. It was Santa Monica, Hermosa Beach, down there. And I didn't know what to do with my life. I had no idea. And I got friendly with some guys, a guy named George, and he had a friend named, Tuna. And so we would all hang around, and we were all broke. And then at one point, when we were broke, we all sort of got a little apartment together. And one day, George came up and he said, can you give me a ride up to Hollywood? My car broke down. And I said, oh, okay, because I hadn't been up to Hollywood. I'm just hanging around at the beach, literally having no idea what to do with my life. So I drive up there, we get up front, and George says, come on in. I said, well, what? He said, I want to check out this acting class. I said, oh, no, I'll wait here in the car. I don't want to go into acting classes, you know. And so anyway, he talks me into it. We go in there, and it was more exciting than I thought, more interesting. George signs up. George says to me, why don't you, sign up? I said, to do what? He said, you'll do acting classes. Good-looking girls here, it'll be nice, So I go back the next day, for whatever reason, I still don't know, and I go to the acting teacher. I say, I'd like to join the class. I said, but the only thing is I don't want to act. He said, well, you can't be in an acting class and not act. And he said, what do you want to do? I said, I just want to watch. He said, no, you can't just watch. You either participate or don't join. So I reluctantly said yes, and then it was an hour ride. And so back and forth from the beach to the acting school twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Within a month, we would split the ride. George got bored with acting school and acting class, didn't want to go anymore, and I'm going back and forth by myself. And it's a 1 hour drive, and it's, for gas money, it's expensive. And I said, well, George, I'm going to move up into Hollywood. And so I moved up closer to Hollywood to go to the acting class. And then within 3 months, and this is for those of you who may not remember the old days, before cell phones, before texting, emails, and all of that stuff, within 3 months, I can't find George anymore. And I never see him. And that acting class ultimately had improvisation. The improvisation led to writing. I started to do some writing in the acting class, and I met an actor called Craig T. Nelson, and he and I would do stuff, and we used to get some laughs. And I said, maybe we can play some clubs to make some money. We'll put an act together and whatever, and we started doing that, and we made a few dollars. But Craig didn't want to do that, and neither did I. And then that broke up, but that writing, that improv writing that I was doing led to writing sketches, and then I ended up working with Mel Brooks on several films, and that led to writing more serious stuff, and then I got to direct, Dinah. So in many ways, my entire career was based on the fact that George said, can you give me a ride up to Hollywood? That's how the career happened. One day someone said, well, what happened to George? I said, I never saw him again. He said, never saw him again after all? I said, no, from 1968 until, now, this was in 2000, I never knew what happened to him, lost him. My wife and I go to the movies in 2000, go see this movie called Blow, starring Johnny Depp. If you've ever seen the film, it's about the guy is this cocaine dealer, and his name is, the beginning of the movie, the guy said, hey, George, you want to so-and-so? And then I hear George Young. And then if you've seen the movie, George Young, who was my roommate, became the largest cocaine dealer in North America. So we went two different directions, obviously.
But both had great success in their respective fields.
He actually made a lot more money than I did.
And you're not in Blow, you don't feature in one of the early scenes. But you mentioned Craig T. Nelson there, who's in the news at the moment. He's the voice of Mr. Incredible in The Incredibles. He's the dad in Poltergeist. He's had an amazing career. And the two of you doing stand-up, and this is, as you say, how you got on. And you say you didn't go to the film school, but you've called it the Mel Brooks University, was what you did go to.
Yes.
What was it like attending Mel Brooks University?
Well, for 3 years, we did 2 films, Silent Movie and High Anxiety. And we would have breakfast together. We'd go back to the studio and write until lunchtime, and so we're just throwing things out and building the scripts. And then when they were done, then we were around when it was being cast. We were around when it was being shot, and and then it was edited when it was scored. So I got to see every step of the way for 2 entire movies. And that was an incredibly beneficial period of time. And Mel, when I used to talk about diner guys and tell stories, and he was the one who first said to me, you ought to write a screenplay about that. And I said, about the diner guy? He said, yeah. He said, Fellini did a thing called I Villoloni, and you can do something on that. And so he was incredibly influential, and truly maybe the funniest person I've ever met. I mean, he's just, he doesn't like just a laugh like, ha ha, because he'll say, no, that's just a ha ha. He wants a laugh that he said, I want them to laugh so much that they choke and they double up and they're going to fall on the floor laughing. That's the laugh I want, But he was great in that way. And because we had the monitors and he's in the scenes, we would watch, and sometimes you'd say, Mel, maybe if what would happen if, and if he liked the idea, he would scream it out how bothered he was that someone mentioned an idea. That would be the way, because you go like, oh, we're not done yet. Barry's not happy, on a given particular thing. And he was great in that he included you. And it was 3 years of just a great learning process from him and great fun at the same time.
I love the quote that you gave, that you're the last writer to get a start in silent movies.
That's true.
Because one of your first credits
That's right.
was
The idea that I start out as a silent movie writer.
And then you're in High Anxiety. I wish we could show the clip, but we couldn't get it. But for somebody that doesn't like acting, you've done a lot of acting over the years.
I did that only because I was making fun of the way it happened is, I don't know if you've ever seen High Anxiety, but there's a shower scene where we make fun of the psycho scene. And except I'm a bellhop with a newspaper. And it came about because I was making fun of Bernard Herrmann's music when I was with that, and I turned it into here, 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 and here's your paper. And I was kind of mimicking the musical notes of that. And I did it one day when we were working it up, and I started to do it, and Mel said, if we do this movie, you've got to do that role. You have got to be the bellhop. It's the craziest moment I've ever seen. And he was that inclusive, and that's how it happened. But I don't like it. I don't like what happens is I keep thinking of other things, and I can't focus in the way you should as an actor.
The clip is on YouTube. If you want to laugh after this, then go and look at it, because I was doubled up laughing, because I think it's the funniest parody of the shower scene. There's been so many parodies, but the fact that it's Mel Brooks in the shower.
Well, you know what happened about less than a month ago? I had to go out to Los Angeles, and I'm about to go through the all the metal detector stuff, and I happen to have this ready to step through, and I realized I have the key in my hand, and I said to the I said to security, I got the key, it's going to beep. He said, no, it's all right, come through. I said, should I put on the conveyor belt, the key, because it's metal, it'll beep. He said, no, come through. So I go through, it goes beep, right? He says, get over here. I said, what? I told you, it's the key. Now get over here. You have to get into the big machine, right? This big machine that scans your whole body. And I get in there, and he leans over to me and says, I loved you in High Anxiety. And then right after that, he says, hands over your head.
What the career that might have been. But you got diverted, and you were nominated for the Academy Award for Writing and Justice for All with Al Pacino, your first of many collaborations with Al, and a film that was made in Baltimore. And then you got to make Dinah. Again, we could spend the whole of the rest of the afternoon talking about Dinah. Vanity Fair called it the most influential film made in the previous 30 years, from 1982 to 2012, because of its influence on things like Seinfeld and Tarantino, and the idea that dialogue can sound the most inconsequential chit-chat patter between people, but in fact that is the way people talk. Right. But Dinah also, it was an independent film, it was a cheap film, it was made with a studio, but again they kind of left you alone, but there was a misunderstanding about what they thought you were doing.
Yeah, well, they left me alone. Somehow they thought it was a high school film. That's what they thought. And so when they saw some dailies, they said, aren't these people too old to be in high school? And somebody said, no, they're not in high school. And so somehow, I don't know how the movie moved through. It was probably Jerry Weintraub telling them some story, and then they bought it because it was really cheap. And I got to make the film. Here's the two sides of it. One, when they saw the film, they truly hated it. I mean, there wasn't a positive thing that they could see to the film, which is why they left it alone, because they thought you can't fix it. So they left it alone. At one point, I remember one of the executives said, there's a scene where he says, are you going to eat that? If you're not going to eat that, et cetera. He said, why don't you just cut to the plot? And I said, well, that is the plot. That's it. They're talking about these things, and out of those conversations, we begin to understand relationships and those things which are important to them or not, which they, at that point in time, didn't grasp at all. And they really didn't like it. So the film ended up being pretty much what I wanted it to be. And by accident, we actually got out there and got noticed. But that was literally by accident. Otherwise, the movie would never have been seen.
Is it true that Pauline Kael, of course, wrote a glowing review which helped, there was 2 reviews that helped get the film to be shown, and I believe it was because the producer's mother, Mark Johnson's mother, was a friend of Pauline Kael's and said, we've made this film, and Pauline Kael saw it,
right.
Wrote this mega rave about it, and then this persuaded. But even then, the film never opened. It's as if they treated it like a foreign film.
Well, they did. They did. Literally, like it was a foreign film to them. And it was one of those weird things. In other words, here, Pauline Kael's influence, I don't think that'll exist anymore. Pauline Kael called the studio executive about Dinah, says, I love Dinah, and when is it coming out? And they said, well, we have no plans to release it. And she said, well, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to run a rave review of the film, even if it's not playing in the United States. And then you deal with that. And then that scared them, and they put it into a theater in New York, and then it broke the house record. So that kind of, where reviewers had some real strong influence that doesn't quite exist anymore. She was very, very helpful, and Michael Schragow of Rolling Stone as well wrote this great review. And so there were several of those reviews that came out that kind of, gave us that first step up that we could, get out there.
Variety called it a dark and depressing drama, as I remember.
Yeah, I think that, right, dark and depressing drama. They didn't know it was funny at all. They had no idea. And so, look, I only remember some of the negative reviews. It's funny, like certain things, dark and depressing drama, and I think it was the Hollywood Reporter that said about Avalon, that literally I think it said was, the movie has no reason to exist. That one you don't forget too quickly.
Everybody, when people talk about Dinah, and I think, as I say, it's one of the films that I think, as long as people watch films, Dinah will be seen and talked about and shown. Partly because everybody in it became incredibly famous. You have Mickey Rourke, you have Kevin Bacon, you have Paul Reiser, you have Ellen Barkin, you have all of these people. I know that Ellen Barkin was the only woman that you saw, but you had 500 going
I saw
for the guys.
500 actors for the 5 roles, and I saw Ellen Barkin for the role of Beth, the only person I saw. She came in, and I thought, she seems perfect.
And I love the little line where she comes out of the cinema and she goes, who wrote this movie? Oh, it's based on the book by, which is what everybody does when they come out of seeing a Barry Levinson film. So everybody will talk about Kevin Bacon, and Mickey Rourke, I think, is the only actor who was alive who could sell the popcorn box scene, the way that he gets the girl to touch a part of his anatomy, and then he gets out of it just using his charm,
right.
Which is, again, the Mickey Rourke magic. But people behind the scenes that you ended up working with a lot, the casting director Ellen Chenoweth.
Yeah.
That was your first time with her. And a name that keeps
all the
coming
way up to
Paterno. Yeah, and the name that keeps coming up all the way through up until his sad death was Stu Linder, the editor.
Yes.
Who had an Academy Award already for Grand Prix. And watching Dinah, the dialogue scenes there, I'm getting the sense that the editing was very crucial. And the fact that you were a first-time director and Stu had this gigantic... Well, he had a huge range of life experience. We can talk for 6 hours about Stu Linder. He was a person who'd had this amazing life who had a huge wealth of experience. And I often find as a critic, whenever you look to see a new film by a new director, they tend to be paired with a really experienced editor, and it seems to be a good thing. Is that a fair way of putting it? Was Stu a crucial person?
He was very influential and very important, and also what happened with the diner scenes, when we got to shoot the diner scenes, which I put all of them at the end of the movie because I figured the more time these guys can spend together, the better it'll be for those scenes, so they'll seem more casual. And then here's and this is the freakiness of film and when you're shooting. We were about to shoot in the diner the very first night, and there was an electrical fire that broke out. And something happened, and we lost the entire night. We couldn't shoot because of this electrical fire. And so we told MGM, and they said, well, you're just going to have to make it up because we're not giving you another day. So now we're 1 day behind with all the work that we have to do. And Peter Sova was a cinematographer who is Czech, and oddly enough, of all the cinematographers that I interviewed, I thought that he had a better sense of the characters and the humor than some of the American cinematographers. So And I still to this day can't figure it out because he had that, thick accent, because you go, buddy, we're going to just take in Melbus. What? But when I could hear it clearly, and we finally, so you got to slow it down a little bit for me because I don't quite get it. When he would do that, he just understood. He understood the whole thing. So now we are lost today, and I say, how are we going to make this up? And Peter said, why don't I get the second camera out of the truck, the backup camera, and we'll use 2 cameras, and I'll operate the other camera. And so we did that. So now we have 2 cameras, and we would shoot, whatever combination we wanted, 2-shot and a single or whatever it might be, to try to speed up the process. And that was one thing that I from that day on, I've always used 2 cameras on any film from then. And the other thing that happened is we did a take, and I thought it was great, and the audio guy said, we got a problem because the guys are overlapping one another. I said, yeah, no, it sounds good. He said, no, but they're off mic. The guys that are on camera are mic'd, but not the ones off camera. And I said, well, that's the way I like it to sound. He said, well, you can fix it in post by, doing all. I said, I don't want to fix it in post. I want them to be able to talk over one another because it's part of the behavior. And I don't want to inhibit them. And he said, well, you can't do it. I said, well, why can't we mic the people who are off camera as well? Mic them and the one on. So he said, but you might not have a shot when they're changing the lines. I don't care. I want to hear the rhythm of the scene play out. And so mic the people off camera. And that, the combination of 2 cameras and miking people on and off camera is how I created the rhythm for all of those scenes. And then it sounded rhythmically the way we would talk with one another, because we don't always let people even finish the sentence, or they don't finish the sentence, or people change, you know what I mean? So you needed that kind of, movements that change and vary speeds, et cetera, to be natural to the actors. And that those 2 things really were incredibly influential.
And do you see what Variety Fair were talking about when they said that those innovations and that confidence in trying to capture the way that people actually talk, which in 1982 was so radical that studio couldn't accept that people were going on?
I mean, I didn't think of it at the time. It didn't occur to me, and but that's what I would read about later. I just thought for the movie, it needed to take ordinary conversation is what we do with our lives most of the time. We don't really necessarily have a lot of really important conversations. And most important conversations get reduced to partial nonsense because we don't direct our thought in a very specific line. It doesn't go that way. It starts to go the way. It goes this way. It goes that way. It's all over the place. That's the way we communicate. And I wasn't consciously thinking of that, but that's what I wanted, is for the inarticulate nature of how we function and communicate to be essential to the story, the characters, its plot.
So Dinah is a huge success, also nominated for the Academy Award, makes pots of money, is #1 everywhere, sets you up for the films that you do next, and then, as we mentioned, Rain Man. Tin Men and Avalon, we can say, are the next ones, obviously, in the Baltimore series. Do you see? How do you see those 4 films fitting together? Because they're all dealing with periods of time that you lived through. Right. They have autobiographical elements. They're going in different ways. And I presume you didn't set out to say, I'm going to make a series of films about Baltimore and my life. Right. That they developed organically. I mean, looking back at those 4 Baltimore films, how do you look at those? Because to me, they're kind of, in a way, if I make films, you're remembering the films maybe more than you remember your own memories. So when you blend the memories and the films together, like the Avalon is drawing from your grandfather and your father and things like that. Or are you able to say, I know exactly what went on in my life and the films are something else?
No, I don't necessarily know any of that, because I don't necessarily, I know people who can write and know how to do an outline and lay the whole structure out from beginning to end. And if I tried that, I would probably still be working on Dinah. because I don't know how to think that way. I sort of know how things are going to connect to a certain degree, but then the characters are also going to be helpful to me. Because the characters will say certain things, and go, oh, well, wait a minute, that's sort of important. You know, so I can begin to sense, at some point, you always, as a writer, you have to take in the fact that there's an audience. And sometimes it's in your head, you're going, it's starting to get boring here. You know, I'm starting to bore myself. And then you know that you got to back off of that. You have to switch. You got to add something. Something's not pushing it ahead. And so there's a kind of an intuitive sensibility that you have to use. Dinah, I wanted to deal with the inability of guys to deal with females. The last 5 days of 1959. What made it work for me is I had all of that, but I couldn't figure out how does it fit together until I thought, why not the last 5 days of 1959, leading up to New Year's Eve? And therefore, everything had to happen in a very concentrated period of time, and therefore, it'll squeeze the piece, as opposed to it took place over 6 months. You know, then I don't think it'll hold together. So you have to find that. So Tin Man has its own plot construction. Avalon, to me, was really, in a sense, about the death of the storyteller. In the beginning of the movie, the old man, the grandfather, the head of the family, is telling the story of the family. And then television comes in, and then television is going to replace the storyteller, the family storyteller. And that will be the storyteller for the future. And late in the film, they're now no longer having a Thanksgiving together at a table with all the confusion and the yelling and the carrying on, and they're eating on a TV tray, watching an American family on television. And that, to me, is like, okay, now I can see how these pieces are going to link together. And that, to me, is what it was about. It wasn't about the immigration of America. It was about the death of the storyteller. And with the death of the storyteller, suddenly the entire extended family will come apart because there's no center anymore. It all fragments out. And that's what I was looking for as television being the influential character that will change everything in American life.
The ending of Avalon, it's kind of bleak. I mean, at the beginning of the film, the family's living in this house, everybody's together, multi-generations, and at the end, and it's partly the way that the cinematography works and the music is coming, and Randy Newman music, it's kind of a downbeat, and television doesn't come out of it very well, which is kind of ironic considering you've had amazing success in television and you've worked very well in television.
But that's the dangers of it, too. Every great invention has a negative side. Every great invention. You know, you can say antibiotics are, fantastic, which is true. And then there's the other part of the antibiotics where you become immune to these things and other things. You go through all of it, the invention of the automobile, how you get from here to here, it's great, and then you have to suddenly build roads, and then all of a sudden oil becomes an issue, and then it becomes a geopolitical issue, and then, things keep springing forward for it. So every invention has a negative side to it. Television has a negative side to it. That's what Wag the Dog was dealing with, is that you can take, a situation, a scandal of a president, and then you can manipulate information in a way that seems very credible, and then play on the certain kinds of emotional things we have. We got to protect our border, the Canadian border. There's things that could be coming in that can be detrimental. You invent a war that doesn't exist. You begin to create and manipulate. That's a byproduct of television. And, of course, then you add social media, which even adds to it. But using television, I've always find the television influence from its inception in '48 is effects that we haven't even really quite understood yet.
And I was reading an interview that you gave, I think, while you were here, and it's kind of a chilling way of looking at it, but a correct way of looking at it is that the Trump thing, you say it's a kind of inevitable progression because it's connected with the way the television spread and the manipulation and things like that. And it's as if to say, we shouldn't be surprised that this is happening now, and we can trace it back to when families did go from the old ways of the grandfather storyteller to trusting the box in the corner of the room.
Yeah. Well, look, television comes in 1948, right? Within 12 years, we end up with JFK, who was an incredibly photographic, TV movie star in terms of his, you looked at him and you went, well, that man's going to be the president. Then you end up with a Ronald Reagan, who was an actor, who becomes the president. And I don't think, and I could be wrong maybe, is that basically any celebrity that's ever run for the presidency, everyone has won. I don't think they've ever lost. Schwarzenegger, becomes the governor. Jesse Ventura in Minnesota, becomes, a political, individual. Al Franken from, Saturday Night Live, etc., becomes a senator. I'm not sure where the celebrity has lost yet, but we just respond to images. That's part of, in a sense, goes back to the beginning as animals. You're looking and something gets your attention, right? It's either friend or foe, and one way or another, boom, right away you connect to that, and so that's just where it takes us, what it all means. I don't have any answers to any of it. I can only look from this little box in Avalon that's wrapped up, in paper with a bow on the top, and once you open that, tear that paper away, and there's that thing, and it's going to have a profound effect from that day forward.
And there's the wonderful scene where they sit and watch the test card, and
test pattern.
The test card, as we call it in Britain, and they're saying, this isn't so great. The radio's better. It changes,
Right.
And I love the scene with Ralph Tabakin, who's the crotchety old man in the shop who says, color TV bar, it's terrible. Yeah. And then he appeared in every one of your films.
I used him in every film until he passed away. Everyone. I brought him in, to Thailand or wherever, to use Ralph.
He was the lucky charm. Just to wrap up on the quadrilogy, as I'm now going to officially rechristen it, it ends with Liberty Heights in '99, which is a film which is now looked upon as kind of a classic of its period and one of the best films about childhood and prejudice in America, featuring a young Ben Foster. I mean, we could talk also about Elijah Wood, who was 9 years old when he played you in Avalon and was absolutely incredible. Liberty Heights was famously mishandled by the studio and never got not really out there. And you've said that you were kind of burned by that, and that's why you've never really gone back to do another Baltimore film. But is that it now, or could you do one more?
Well, I'd like to do one more. I don't know if I can because it's just a change of theatrical in that those kind of personal character-driven pieces are more and more difficult to make. I was talking to about Milos Forman, who basically did very humanistic work, in his career, right? Comedically, dramatically, whatever. But he was basically humanistic type of work. It'd be very hard to do those films, and it's very hard for the filmmakers that want to do these more personal stories. Not that it has to be directed to them, but in terms of characters and relationships, which is what we're about for the most part. And we're now basically into the Marvel universe right now, which is all well and good, but you'd like a little bit more diversification. And that's why you're seeing streaming video and HBO and everything, because theatrical has abdicated that whole area of filmmaking. So that's where the future will go.
But we have the Barry Levinson cinematic universe. I mean, there's little touches like the diner getting lowered into place in is it Avalon or is it Liberty Heights where we see the diner?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was great to do those. I mean, I'd like to do one to sort of finish it off in a sense, which I wrote actually, but I don't know if I'll get that made or not. It's a real, because it doesn't have sort of like sizzle to it. They're looking for something that's got sizzle that you can sell, and again, it gets back to television for the most part. When you want to run those commercials on TV, and you got to get a quick hit, boom, and so if you got people talking, dealing with things, whatever, it's very hard to sell that in a 30-second spot.
I think a 3-part mini-series for HBO about Baltimore from the 40s to the 70s is what we need from Barry Levinson.
Okay, I'm ready.
Well, I'll get on the phone to them. I'm aware that we don't have infinite time. We will give the audience a chance to ask some questions. I'm going to go through some of the other films that you've made because, as I say, we could be here till tomorrow. The Natural, which deals with the olive of sport. When I met you yesterday, you were wearing an Orioles cap. Working with Robert Redford on your second film. The leap from Dinah, a very intimate film, to The Natural. That seemed to be a smooth leap for you. Was that how it felt?
Well, it wasn't smooth because it was a complicated film to do with, and that's before they had all of the, crowd. How you can now put crowd into a shot, so you can take an empty stadium and you can fill it up with 40,000 people, just digitally. Back in those days, you had to have, you had to fill it up or fill up enough for the particular shot. So, not that everybody here knows baseball, but if you're going to point towards first base, and because the place is sold out for this game, if you're going to throw to first base, we had 6,000 extras to do that shot. And then say somebody throws a ball a little bit too far to the left, and then all of a sudden you don't see any crowd. So now you got to do the shot over again. So every time you want to do another shot where there's a crowd, you have to keep moving the 6,000 people over and over and over again until you can do it. So just that logistics of that alone were difficult. And at the time, there had never been a fable about baseball, which to me is inherent in the game, because when people talk about, this would be just the reason I thought was fascinating, is that when people talk about it, say, the ball was hit, it was so deep out into the, thing, and he was running, and he was climbing the wall. The story gets bigger and bigger the more it's retold. And so it's like the retelling of a story many, many times over. And that, to me, was The Natural. Everything was heightened beyond just reality.
You mentioned there about effects and the changes. I mean, the fact that a Barry Levinson film was the first one to have a CGI character is something that people will be surprised about. Young Sherlock Holmes, where the knight in armor jumps out of the thing. Yeah. You were one of the first ones to use virtual reality in Disclosure, where they put the helmet on and go into a
that's right,
into a whole thing. So the cutting edge of technology with Barry Levinson films. But there are special effects in cinema, and then there is this very incredibly special effect that was called Robin Williams, which is something you can't. On the day that a computer comes up with something like Robin Williams is the day we can all go home, because it will never happen.
What a mind. Yeah.
Good Morning Vietnam, which is, to say it's, could you say it's your most beloved film? I don't know. It's the one that people, maybe respond to still. As I say, Rain Man, so many others. But Good Morning Vietnam is a lot of people's favorite film, and it still holds up. What's incredible, I rewatched it. There's only 15 minutes of Robin Williams doing his improv on the microphone, and again, Stu Linder, the editor, must have had the world's worst job to condense Robin Williams' incredible improvs. But
through that, a lot of times you had to try to whittle it down a little bit. It was such great stuff.
And as a director, how do you direct Robin Williams within that? Because he's got to go from that to the most serious, Graham Greene-esque, stuff going on. But then you have the side-splitting comedy.
Well, look, he was really talented. There's no question about that. He was insecure about it initially, but he had an immense talent and a huge heart and an enormous desire to connect to other people. And I'll just tell you one story, and this is sort of about directing and also about Robin. We were doing the scene. We had these scenes with the Vietnamese students. And he's talking to them, they're asking questions, whatever. And we do several setups, and I wasn't particularly happy with it because it didn't feel real to me. It didn't feel like it felt like they were doing lines, the Vietnamese. It didn't feel credible to me at all. And I thought, what am I going to do? It's just not, it doesn't live. I don't believe the people in the scene. And so we take a break, and then I see Robin, he's over there with the class. They're outside now on the break. And he's talking to them, and they're laughing, and then they're talking to him, and he's saying something, and then they're laughing, and it's back and forth. And there was this amazing connection between him and these Vietnamese that we had. And I'm looking at that and said, well, see, now that I believe, you know, that's real. That's their personalities, and they're genuinely having a good time with them. And so when we went back to the set, you know, which was a real location, I said to Robin, I said, why don't we just forget, look, here's the key things in the scenes, this, and this. And why don't we just forget saying the line specifically? I'm not gonna slate the scene. I'm not gonna tell the actors are beginning or whatever. You just start talking to them and leading them into it, and then let's just get the points we have to get in some easy way where they don't even know that the scene is being shot. And so what we did was, at a certain point he'd start talking to them, and then I would give a little hand signal and the cameras would start rolling. And then he started talking to them, and they're saying other things, and he's responding, and then they're laughing because they thought that was funny. And that's how all those scenes were built. And we got the plot points that we had to lay out, but it was very natural, and it was natural to them. So, and they were enjoying themselves, and in a way which they should be in the context of what's taking place. And so all those scenes came alive. Now they worked because Robin has this desire to communicate all the time. He's always trying to do that, and he'll find ways to do that. And so from that point on, we used that throughout the film. Anytime he was dealing with the Vietnamese, he would make these connections, and I didn't slate any of it, and nobody knew what was being filmed or not. And at the end of the movie, there's a softball game. And I said we had 2 MPs, and I said, look, here's what we're gonna do. I'm not gonna explain to the Vietnamese how to play the game. I'm just gonna let them try to figure it out. And anytime you see them running to the wrong base, just go and get them and lead them back to where they ought to go. Just, you know, trying to keep order here. And I said this to Robin, and that scene has certain plot things we have to hit, but most of it is they're trying to hit the ball and whatever. And there is a little scene, and if you ever watch the movie again, there's a little scene when I can't remember his name right now. He came up to me because we were using melons instead of a softball, baseball. And he comes up to me, he says, you know, I have seen, you know, a real, you know, baseball with my own eyes. And this is not, you know, a baseball. And I said, listen, you know, I'm not in charge of the equipment. And he said, and he was very formal, then who shall I talk to? I said, you have to talk to Robin. He's in charge of all the equipment. He said, I shall do that. And then I quickly walked by Robin and I said, listen, he's going to come over. He's got a problem with the melon. You'll have to deal with him. And then I wandered away. He came he came over to Robin, and the camera followed him over there and then filmed it. And that discussion they had is literally he's having a problem with the melon. And that's how that scene was put together. And the entire softball game was put together a combination of giving a little bit of guidance and letting them, so that I thought it was important, because in any Vietnam film I had seen, it's always about the war. And there's never anything about the interaction between the Vietnamese and soldiers. And the Vietnamese and the humor that they have and how they talk to one another and all of that as a real element in the film. And that was real important to me, and we were able to bring that out in the course of it, and that's because Robin has that way, as I say, to find ways to connect to people, and he was extraordinary that way.
So it has documentary elements, you could almost say.
Yeah, I guess you want to call it that, yes. I mean, it's just trying to find a way to put something on the screen that seems credible, that tells you about character and behavior.
Talk about character and behavior. 2 of your biggest hits of the 90s, Bugsy and Sleepers, 2 very, very different films, but both are ensembles. They both have big casts, mainly made up of male actors. Obviously, you have Annette Bening and Minnie Driver, who are, you know, both wonderful in those films. Are you comfortable with this idea that Barry Levinson is an actor's director? And looking at a film like Bugsy, for instance, which I think is the only time Harvey Keitel has got an Academy Award nomination. Joe Mantegna is fantastic in the film. You have Warren Beatty, the giant star, meets his future wife.
Yes.
On the set.
Yeah.
So again, Barry Levinson, actors director. Are you happy with that, or is it like that's too pat?
I don't know. I mean, I don't much think about that in that regard. It's in. To be here to talk about, film and stuff is fun to me, in a sense of being recognized or acknowledged or any of that. I always find that a little difficult because it's sort of somehow you get singled out in a way. Which I guess goes back to from a kid, is that the idea that I'm out doing something I would never have imagined ever doing. Maybe I haven't gotten over that. So it's a little bit like, the kid going, well, I don't know, why should I get any kind of recognition other than just doing the work that I do? So I'm never 100% comfortable with that, even though I can appreciate it.
I know when you got the Writers Guild of America Laurel Award in 2010, and the previous recipient had been Bud Schulberg, who'd written On the Waterfront, and previous winners have been people like Paddy Chayefsky and Mel Brooks. The line that you said was, I guess now I have to acknowledge I'm a writer.
Yes.
And in a way, you look back on the 28 films, feature-length films, that we haven't mentioned television that much. Homicide, which you won the Directors Guild Award for. You look back and now you kind of have to admit that you have been a director. I mean, that even though that you didn't set out, that is what's happened.
And that's the great fun. I mean, I'm always fascinated by it. I mean, the fact you say I did that many films, I've never been quite sure how many I did. But it's exciting. If I walked into a set and somehow it didn't excite me or it bored me, I wouldn't do it. But every scene that you do, because if you can get to a certain place, an actor will surprise you. And you go, what a great moment that is. Oh, that's a good moment. You know what I mean? Or you say, how about if we do this? Just try this, and then somebody will do it, and you go, yeah, that's good. Or you build on those moments, and then you're in the process of doing it. And that to me is the best part. You know what I mean? There's that thing of bringing people together and you're doing something specific. And you can get them all to understand where you're going and what it is that we're all part of. Because you can't do it alone. There is this community that's part of every film you do. And if a couple things get out of whack, they can get really out of whack and they can throw a film off track very quickly. So you have to find, how do we all come together to make this piece, work? And be specific to it. Can't go here and here and it's all over the place. It's got to have this very specific sensibility to it.
And as you mentioned that, the studios, they're interested in a certain type of film, and you have stories to tell, and the stories that you're telling are not the ones, 30 years ago, a film like The Wizard of Lies would have been a big theatrical release. It would have had a huge push, thousands of prints. You Don't Know Jack. I think you gave an interview where you said if you work out how many people have seen this film, it's the equivalent of $140 million box office. Yeah. And it won every award going for Al Pacino. So in this present decade, the 2010s, you have found the way to tell those stories again, and it's been on HBO largely, working again with Pacino and De Niro and these fantastic actors. So you've now found a kind of comfortable space, and HBO has given you that space to work within and bring those, because Robert De Niro got the best reviews of his for the last 20 years for The Wizard of Lies.
Yeah, no, he did. He got great reviews.
And so you could, Barry Levinson can attract those names, wants to work with those people, and HBO will give you that support. I mean, it feels as though you're in a good place just now.
It seems so. At this minute. At this moment in time.
We can, I think, maybe at this point throw it up to the audience, and if they want to bring in kind of current political stuff, which I know you're very keen to talk about and you have many perspectives. We do have a microphone, which our assistant will be gracious enough to give. The first hand that I saw go up was the lady in the front row. So in the middle, the lady has a question.
Thank you. You're just such a fantastic storyteller through film and in person. This was just really a great pleasure to be here. And I can assure you that your films did really well in Czechoslovakia as well. I saw Rain Man in cinema at least twice, and it was a huge hit and stayed in one of the best cinemas in Prague for a long time. And when I resettled to America, Wag the Dog was one of the films that really struck me, and I found it scary, and still it is scary. And but I wanted to sort of move this a little. I think that this storytelling mastery, you share that with Miloš Forman. And however, he was not as lucky as you were with his first film in America. He did not receive a Pauline Kael raving review. And I was wondering if you saw Taking Off, his first American film in the 70s or ever, and why would you think that it failed? If you mind, if you want to talk about it.
I did see that, and I saw some of his films earlier, you know, Fireman's Ball and those. What happens periodically, you can do a film that can be very good, and depending what's happening at a studio and distribution, it can easily get lost. And I don't think they knew, as happens a lot with certain films, they don't know how to sell it, so they don't know what to do. And Miloš had a certain sensibility to his work, and it hadn't quite been accepted yet. If he probably did that after a more popular film, you know, then it might be, okay, now we know. You know, a lot of that depends on timing as well. It was a terrific film, and but timing and the studio distribution system has a huge effect.
The next question, gentleman on the right.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Levinson. I'm Geza from Hungary, and you were talking a lot about the humanistic touch in the films and in your films. You liked Elia Kazan, so Rayman was a huge, big success. So my question would be, to make the long story short, what happened? Why did we lost the human touch? Who is to blame? The system or the viewers? And yourself as a storyteller, how did you survive this change?
It's a good question. A lot of it I would put on the shoulders of television, because if you have to do a 30-second spot, you have to sell it in 30 seconds, and therefore it needs a very specific, quick narrative or images that look exciting. And if you take certain movies that don't have those components that can be played that quickly, it's very hard to get it across to the viewers at home to go, we got to go see this movie. So if you're doing some of the Marvel things, you immediately go like, look at that. You know, the guy's flying a thing and something blows up, whatever it may be, and the name of the movie. But let's take Rain Man. How would you sell it in a 30-second spot where everybody goes, we have to go see it this weekend? And so how do you sell is a big, big issue. So in many ways, a studio person might look at the movie and say, well, you know, look, it's a great idea, but how am I going to sell it? And then they won't make it because they're not sure how to sell it. And so that became one of the problems. And I don't think we've worked around it, because they're not interested in a movie that might make $8 million on a weekend or $6 million and maybe makes 50 or 60. Even if it doesn't cost much, they're looking at a movie that can make 600 million. And so they're looking for that sizzle all the time. And the other films, they go, yeah, okay, but it doesn't mean anything to them. It's not going to move their bottom line. These are giant corporations now.
Next question. The microphone will come to you, yes?
Hi, I'm Rosa from Hungary. My name is Reika, and I have a question. Did it happen to you, because some directors have the histories with that you had an idea, but because of the studio or something else, some circumstance outside of you, you had to change an idea in one of your movies, and you were very sad about it, or you regretted afterwards?
Was the question...
Did you ever have to change one of your films because the studio interfered and actually change the story or change what happened? Yeah. Was there ever sort of that degree of significant external meddling, I think we would call it?
I think I've been fairly lucky in that regard, that I haven't had a lot of force to change things for the supposed, commercialization of the piece. I'm not exactly sure why. I've been reasonably lucky in that the movie I make is the movie that, I've said, even when they don't like the movie, they've left it alone. I always had things when we were doing Rain Man, because at the end he puts him on the train, and then the train drives away, and Raymond is looking at the TV. And so the studio executive, can he at least look out the window and, wave goodbye, just some goodbye moment? I said, no, he's got to watch Wapner. It's on the television. Yeah, no. But just a look to one another. The brothers, just a look. I said, but and they wanted what they thought was a happy ending. And I said, I don't know how you do a happy ending. The film has completed itself. And I tried to explain, and maybe I didn't explain it right. I said, audiences don't necessarily care about a happy ending. They want a satisfactory ending. I said, Gone with the Wind is a big, expensive movie in a time. At the end of the film, Clark Gable walks away from Vivian Leigh and says, frankly, I don't give a damn, and leaves her. That's not a happy ending. But what is a completion is she says, oh, well, tomorrow's another day. She will survive. That's a conclusion. That's what we want, is something there, but not necessarily a happy ending. We can't put a happy ending. And I don't think they bought what I said, but they couldn't figure out what else to do.
But if you watch, before we get the next question, Sleepers, I mean, that's a gruelingly horrible, some things that happen in Sleepers, I mean, that's a very hard film to watch. Successfully, I mean, it's if you're not disturbed by that film, then the film is obviously not working. But at the end of the film, there is uplift. De Niro goes into the witness box and lies, and and everybody has you do give the audience in that film, you do give them a sense of hope, because there are other ways to tell that story.
But that's not the ending, though. The ending is they get together for one last time, and then two of them ended up dying, and things didn't work out all that well. But they did have their one last gathering that was happy. But the De Niro thing was part of the plot, which is earlier. The conclusion isn't necessarily rewarding, but there is a sense of I know what you mean. There's a little bit of a sense of what once was.
Because you adapted the book. I mean, it's a screenplay credit from you, adapted from Lorenzo Carcaterra's book, which I think was a tricky book to adapt. But anyway, we're getting into Sleepers. Next question, the microphone will come.
Hello. I do have a political question, if I can, after this, but I have to take this chance after living with this film for most of my life. The Natural. I played baseball growing up. The final scene, the home run scene, we acted out many times. Did you ever consider having him strike out instead of the very heroic?
Well, that was always that's why critics initially didn't like it, because they said, well, he should strike out. And I said, because that's the way the book had it, and I said, well, let me talk about some of the book scenes. In the book, he strikes out and he's leaving the stadium, and the young boy with a cap on there, like a newspaper boy, says, "Say it ain't so, Roy. Say it ain't so." I said, "You want to use that for an ending?" No, not that. That doesn't work. And so I mentioned all the inconsistencies in terms of the book and how it would play on film. Because it is a fable from beginning to end, it seems consistent. If he hit the home run out of the blue and it wasn't part of the fabric of the piece, then I would agree 100%. But because a guy runs through a wall, to catch a ball and dies, and then there's they're putting his ashes from a helicopter, from an airplane over the stadium. There are outlandishly crazy things in this fable. And I think that ending we had was consistent with the fable.
So beautifully shot too.
Thanks.
Amazing.
Caleb Deschanel did a wonderful job.
My political question, after Wag the Dog and the controversy that created and the almost documentary sense of it in American political culture, can a film of its day in today's political climate be made about Donald Trump? Will theaters, it's so toxic right now, something outside of a documentary, would it have to be allegorical or a fable? I mean, can anyone make a film that really documents what's going on right now?
Well, I mean, I guess it could. I guess you can. I think generally you have to find another way in, because to tell any political story as just a political story, I don't think in itself is enough. Here's what I mean. Let's take the fear of basically nuclear, proliferation, the death of the world. 2 films were made, came out within months of one another. One was called Fail Safe, didn't do particularly well. The other was Dr. Strangelove, the comedic, dark comic version of us destroying ourselves. That was the big hit. So it took the subject and turned it upside down in a way. So we were able to be amused by it, frightened by it, and in some way it told the story in a way that was more fascinating than the straight ahead look of Failsafe. I think that applies to most filmmaking, is that you to just go straight into the story isn't necessarily enough. You have to find something else to bring to the table. And so we're in the middle of things. It's very hard right in the middle to do things. If in fact it's the middle, it could be the beginning, the beginning of the middle, or wherever we are. But it's early in the process to do that. So I think many times if you can find another angle in whatever you're doing. Look, the Marx Brothers did, Duck Soup, and they were doing all kinds of political things in it, and it was in this crazy place between Fredonia and whatever it is, and it was this outlandish, comedy. It wasn't successful, by the way, in its own time. Later, it became, one of their great films, but not at the time. But you're in the political arena, it's always difficult. But I do think if you can find a way in that's not just straight ahead, you're apt to, I think, make it more interesting.
We have a question from the gentleman in the dark T-shirt in the middle. He's just standing up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Levinson. I'm very grateful you are here. I have to say that my most favorite film from your filmography is You Don't Know, Jack. I rewatched it at least 11 times, I have to say. If I could have 2 questions related to screenwriting. First of all, in Paterno movie, how difficult was to find the right balance between the 2 storylines. Storyline by Paterno and his family, and storyline by a journalist. And the second question, maybe a silly question, but what is the most usual mistake or mistakes that you are reading in today's or past screenplays?
Okay, what the last question, say that again?
When you read screenplays now, or you look back at screenplays, what is the most common mistakes maybe that younger or less experienced screenplay writers would make? What are kind of mistakes that they tend to make?
Well, that's a hard question to answer in terms of the mistakes in terms of it, because I think the thing you have to get across, because a screenplay is not a novel, you have to very quickly tell that reader, who may be the buyer or a potential actor, what it is that you're doing and you're going for. And So you got to quickly convey that very early on, because if you're not sure where it goes and it's 25 pages in and you don't know what it is, and you're not sure about the characters, there's a tendency they're going to throw it down and not read it. And so you got to quickly lay that out. Oh, here's a character. Well, that's an interesting character. Oh, that's something. Well, you know what I mean? So you have to think of it in terms of somebody reading it and getting an idea of what it is right away. Now, I only say that because I didn't do that with Dinah in that way. Ellen Barkin told me when she originally read the script, she threw it in the trash can after reading it. And her boyfriend at the time came in and he sees it in the trash can and he pulls it out and he's reading it. And he said, gee, why is this in the trash can? She said, it's terrible. And he said, really? I just read it. You better read this again. This is really good. Now, what I'm writing, he got, but she didn't. And sometimes I think if you think of it, it's better that you give a certain clarity, because this is only about selling it, not about it being on the screen. So a screenplay is a selling tool. What was the other part?
The question about Paterno, your balance between the story of Paterno and the journalist, because they never actually meet.
No, they never do, and it's like two storylines, which obviously her story is going to feed into the national press, and that's going to be one of the elements that finally topples the whole thing down. And it was designed to be, there's her story, and then there's where he is, and then of course there's the university's individuals. So there's really kind of three elements that are going on three separate tracks for the most part, except the university does deal with him, Paterno, only in one particular sequence.
I think we have time for perhaps one last question. Yes, the lady has been patient. The microphone will come.
Hello, my name is Juliet, and the question is, well, you've been, as far as I understood, pretty fortunate with the studio, and they weren't exactly on your tail or something. So the question is, was there a movie, which one was like, when you had your hands down, when you thought like, I couldn't do that. Well, this one is tough, and then you obviously did it.
In the career, has been the one where you've just felt like there's no way that I can get this to be done, and then you found a way to do it. Is that what you're asking? Yeah.
No, I don't think I've had one where I'd said I can't do it and then figured out. I mean, I've had certain trepidations about certain films, and so I had the script for a little bit of time until I can sort it out in my head. But I think generally when I read something, I get the images of what it would be like, and pretty quickly go, yeah, that should be it. I don't think, it's not a long process. I don't remember where it took me a long time to figure out if I wanted to do a movie or not. I can't remember that. I don't think so. Thank you.
Well, a lot of the films are about memory, and what's the line? I wish I could remember it better.
Yeah, the grandfather in the movie, and if I knew things would no longer exist, I would have tried to remember better.
It is July the 5th. We should have had you yesterday for July the 4th, because that would have been so perfect. Because I think at the moment we're hearing stories from America which are not inspiring and not uplifting, but we have your films, and they are stories from America which I think we need now and in the years to come, because they are there, and as I say, they'll always be there. They're part of the cinematic history. A British person's going to use baseball terms, so I'm going to apologise, but your batting average has been remarkable. And your number of home runs, it has ensured your place in the pantheon. And we are so thrilled, so honoured that you would come here to receive our Lifetime Achievement Award. Obviously one of the great American writer-directors of cinema. Our guest today, please join me in welcoming, in thanking and welcoming and thanking and saying a big KVIFF thank you to Barry Levinson.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.